Okay, so this is a talk about how I got into medical school. I have had a interesting journey, and I have also helped many other students get into medical school as well. And so I'm hoping that this presentation is very informative and very helpful for all of you and if there are any students in the audience for that journey as well. So just a big disclaimer at the beginning is that medical school, there are many ways to get in, and there's many different ways to become a doctor. And it's important for you to reflect on your own strengths and your interests, and to make sure that you stay true to yourself and what you want to do. And another thing is that medicine is a very long journey, and it's very rewarding, but it can be tiring as well. So it's important to make sure that if you want to pursue the career of medicine and being a doctor, to make sure that you know that's what you want. So the presentation is going to be organized into 10 sections. First, I'll be talking to you just an overview about me and my journey. I'll be talking about an overview of the application process for medical school here in Canada. And I'll talk about choosing an university program for your undergraduate studies. I'll be talking about the GPA and what to know and what to consider about it, as well as the MCAT and what you should focus on and how I studied for it. Later, I'll be talking about the CASPER, which is a specific type of test that you have to do to get into medical school. More on that later. I'll be talking about the extracurriculars that I did, and as well as a strategy for extracurriculars. And then I'll be talking about the interviews to get into medical school and how I prepared. And I would be talking about a general timeline for your application, starting from grade 12 to when you're accepted. And finally, I'll be sharing some final thoughts on my journey and the application process as a whole that I hope will be helpful. So first, a little bit about me. I grew up in London, Ontario, and then moved to Toronto when I was in grade 8. And I went to University of Toronto Schools, or UTS, with Ruby. And I went to Western University for my undergraduate studies, and I studied medical sciences there. I applied to medical school in Canada during my third year of undergrad, and I was accepted to the University of Toronto Medical School on my first try. During medical school, I also completed another master's degree at the same time as my MD degree, and so now I graduate with both degrees. And I was accepted to my first choice residency, which is emergency medicine at the University of Toronto, which happens to be one of the most competitive residency programs in Canada. And alongside my own experience, I've also coached many undergraduate students to get into medical school. And now I've coached quite a few medical students to get into a residency as well. So I have a good handle on the application process from multiple angles. All right, so first we're going to talk about an overview of the application process. So first is that there's a perception that medical school is quite competitive, and that is true. It's hard to come up with exact numbers for how competitive it is because not all of the schools report the data on the applicants and who gets in. You should know that there are in-province advantages for certain schools. These are the ones in the prairies. So Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Also in the Maritimes, so Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and BC. Currently, unfortunately, there are no in-province advantages for Ontario schools. And so being a student in Ontario doesn't make it easier to get into an Ontario med school. In terms of some rough figures, we have some numbers that in 2018-2019 cycle, McMaster received around 4,900 applications for 205 spots. Queens received almost the same amount for 101 spots, and Ottawa received around 4,300 applications for 156 spots. So again, we don't know exact numbers, but you can estimate that the acceptance rate to get into medical school is around 5% when you consider all the schools together. And so what do you actually need to apply to medical school? Well, there are a few things, and programs require you to have a combination of the following things. First is a good GPA or grade point average to have during your undergraduate studies. Second is a good score on the MCAT, which is the medical college admission test, which everyone needs to take to apply to medical school. Third, you need a breadth of extracurriculars, which I will go into later. And four, many programs, although not all, require some prerequisite courses to take during your undergrad studies. And furthermore, in the requirements, some schools let you apply in third year. So the schools on the left, University of Toronto, McMaster, Ottawa, Queen's, UBC, Calgary, and UAlberta and Edmonton will let you apply in third year. But the rest of the schools only let you apply in fourth year and further years. If you don't get in fourth year, then you can apply later in your master's and PhD or later on. And these are the schools: Dalhousie, McGill, Northern Ontario School of Medicine, which is in Thunder Bay, University of Saskatchewan, Memorial, University of Manitoba, and the University of Western Ontario. And so the four on the left, U of T, Mac, Ottawa, and Queens are the schools that I applied to. And so I am the most familiar with their application cycle, although I do know quite a bit about all the other processes as well. And so thinking about obviously applying to medical school is a long process, but it really starts in grade 12 and in high school when you're choosing a university program to study. And so there are a lot of considerations for university programs to choose the one that's the best for you. And you should take all of these factors into account. So one is the school environment. What kind of school culture they have, how large are the classes, how accessible are the professors is important. You should also think about the distance from home. If you're someone who wants to visit home frequently, then that's important to you, then you should go close to home. If you are a little afraid of moving far away, then that's something to know. Another thing is how difficult the school is. And so different universities have different difficulties for their courses, and you want to make sure that you don't go to a school that's too hard. And finally, you want to think about how many people from that undergraduate degree end up in medical school. And you want to go to one where a lot of students go to medical school. So you have mentors who are in older years, but also you know that it's a relatively possible and doable pathway. And so some of the common entry programs that I have seen across the different medical schools and different residency programs are McMaster University Health Sciences, University of Toronto Life Sciences, Western University Medical Sciences, and Queen's University Life Sciences are the ones that I believe to be the most common in getting into medical school. And so we have some numbers here from the University of Toronto Medical School incoming class, where they actually tell us which universities did the students come from. So you can see in this graph and in this table, you can see divided by the undergraduate program, how many people from each category, for each school, ended up in the incoming class of medical students. And you can see here, Toronto has quite a few, McMaster has the most, and these other Ontario schools. And then you further into other Ontario schools, other Canadian schools, and then American and international schools. And so what you need to think about is not just the absolute number, but also how large are those programs? And then that can give you an idea of the proportion of people in those programs that actually get in. And so if you look at University of Toronto, you can see that they have a large proportion of the incoming medical student class. But you should also know that in Toronto, they have a huge number of students, and it's one of the largest undergraduate programs in Canada. And for such a large program, only few people get acceptances. And so that's a relatively small proportion. That means that it's actually quite hard to get into medical school from this program. If you compare it to a McMaster, looking at the McMaster Health Sciences program, which is where most medical students are from, they're a very small program of 240 graduates, but they have 91 acceptances in that year. And so you can see that in McMaster, for example, if you get into the Health Sciences program, you have a much higher percent chance of getting into medical school at U of T. And this is also true for all the medical schools across Canada. It's just that only U of T publishes their numbers. And so you can kind of take away that definitely some university programs make it easier to get into medical school from those programs. And so what I did is I went to Western for their Bachelor of Medical Sciences program. I thought it was an excellent program, and it gave me a great foundation, and also allowed me to have research opportunities and extracurricular opportunities that helped me develop a good application and let me get in on my first try out of third year. And so the bottom line is that you need to think about a lot of things when choosing a university program. You want to choose a program that will work well with your learning style and also your personal life. And something you should know is that I have met people from many, many different schools. And so you can get in from any program. However, I will say that if you can get into McMaster Health Sciences, it's probably the best shot and the easiest path to getting into medical school in Canada. McMaster Health Sciences is also a very competitive program, which around a 4% acceptance rate. And so if you can't get into McMaster Health Science, then Western and Queen's are other good options in Ontario that I would recommend. Other good programs outside of Ontario include UBC, McGill, and Calgary. If you have a plan to move out of Ontario for whatever reason, then they're excellent schools, and many of them get into medical school from their programs as well. Okay, next I want to talk about GPA, which is a big thing and probably the most important part of an application. And so the GPA, or the grade point average, is probably the most important factor into preparing for medical school and getting in. And this is because you can retake the MCAT multiple times, as many times as you want. You can do extracurriculars and improve your extracurriculars over time. But if you do poorly on a GPA, then it's very hard to recover from and to correct that over time. And so there's a different range of GPA points that you want to be competitive. But overall, to get in, you should have at least the 3.7 in your GPA to have a good shot of getting in. And GPA is calculated in many ways, and it can be a little complicated. But in Ontario, it's done with the OMSAS, or Ontario Medical School Application Service process, which I will now walk you through. And so the GPA, you should know, especially if you're a student either in university or going into university soon, that the GPA conversion rewards consistency instead of having very high highs and low lows. You should have a consistently high percentage across all your courses to get the best GPA. And so this is just an example calculation that I want to walk you through to show how consistency is everything when it comes to GPA. This is just a sample set of a transcript. Here you have each course, how much they weigh, what percentage they got in the course, and then how that converts into a GPA calculation. And so if you look at the table before, you can see that a 90 to 100 gets a 4.0, 85 to 89 gets a 3.9, 80 to 84% gets a 3.7, and then it drops very suddenly to a 3.3 from 77 to 79. Again, it drops again to 3, and then again drops very sharply to 2.7 if you get a low 70s%. And so what that means is that if you have a set of courses, let's say this is your first year courses in university, and you do very well on one course, a 99%, and then you do very well on the other one, 100%, and then you do a 79% on your third course, which is a full year or full credit course GPA conversion, that goes to a 3.3. And overall, your GPA for the semester, even though you might have done, it feels like you did very well, it's a 3.65, which is below where you want to be. And it's not very competitive for medical school, especially if you're applying on a third year. That being said, if let's do this other example, let's say you got a 90 in one course, a 91 in the other course, and an 85 in the last course. So no 99s or 100s, but you still did pretty well in every course, and you do the appropriate calculation, you end up with a GPA of 3.95, which is very competitive and would probably get you an interview. So that being said, it's very important to remember that GPA rewards consistency more than anything else, and you should try to always do pretty well in all your courses, and to make sure you don't have one course that drags your GPA down. And so in terms of my own story with my GPA, in my first year of undergrad, I had a perfect 4.0 GPA. So I got at least 90 or above in all of my courses. And the reason why I did well in my courses is because in grade 12, I did a lot of AP courses. I did them in calculus and biology and physics and chemistry. And because AP courses, they teach you more than the normal grade 12 level, you learn a lot, and it really helps you in university. In second year, I took on more extracurriculars and more research. And so I ended with a GPA of 3.9. And so my combined GPA when I was applying was 3.95, which was fairly competitive. And so I think the main things to remember about your GPA is that you should try to be consistent and do well in every course. Don't just try to be great in one or two courses. In terms of choosing courses for your program, you should try to pick courses that you're interested in, but you should also know that some courses are easier to get a high GPA than others. For example, it's very common that in university, English courses or essay-based courses are usually harder to get above a 90% in, so you should avoid those and go for things usually like math or other multiple choice based exams, courses that have those that make it easier to have a high GPA. You should also try to have friends in upper years who can tell you what kind of courses to pick, so that because they usually know by having gone through the process which courses are easier and harder. And finally, a big thing is that if you have the opportunity to, in high school, you should try to take AP or IB courses, because they will help you a lot in university, and they'll help you get a good GPA when it matters. And it's actually worth it I would say it's worth it to do a little bit less well in your courses in high school if it means that your university GPA will be really high. Okay. All right. So next section is the MCAT. And so the MCAT, it stands for the Medical College Admission Test. And you need to take it to apply to any medical school in Canada and in the USA. And it's a very weird marking scheme. It's scored out of 528. It's made out of 4 sections. The first section is chemistry and physics. The second section is critical analysis and reasoning. The third is biology, and the fourth is psychology and sociology. So it's a very broad test. It's pretty long. It lasts 7.5 hours. And usually students study for around 3 to 4 months. And if you're applying to medical school in third year, like I did, then you would want to write this in the summer after your second year. So between second year and third year, you want to save off that summer to study and to write the test. And so every school in Canada is a little different in how they mark and weigh the MCAT for admission. For U of T, it's only used as a cutoff. So if you get 50th percentile in each section, then they don't look at it anymore. It's just a check mark. For McMaster, they only look at the critical analysis and reading skills, which is tests your comprehension of passages, of reading English and analyzing sentences and paragraphs. And it's marked competitively. And Western has different cutoffs for each section, but they care the most about CARS. And so in general, for people who are applying to medical school in Ontario, you should really focus the most on the critical analysis and reading skills section, or CARS, because it's the most highly valued by schools. And for your studying, you should focus on that. And what score should you aim for? So I got, not every school publishes statistics, but McMaster and the Manitoba University do. And so McMaster, they look at the critical analysis of reading section. And this is their a table of the different CAR scores of the people that they admitted. And so this is a kind of a confusing table, but what you should know is that the average CAR score of people who got in was 95th percentile. And the median was also 95th percentile. And that corresponds to a score of 129. If you look at the Manitoba information, they look at all sections, but basically the average of people who got in into Manitoba Medical School from out of Manitoba was 522, or the 99th percentile. So obviously this means that when you're studying for the MCAT, you should aim for a very high score. Especially in CARS, you should aim for at least a 90th percentile, I would say, but aim for 95th percentile or higher. And so what did I do to study for the MCAT? Well, I studied for 3 months in May, June, and July of that summer. And I wrote it August 8th. And this was in the summer after my second year of university. During this time, I was also volunteering and doing a little bit of research, but I didn't have a full-time job. I studied from these resources, and so there are many different resources you can study for and different books you can buy. I use like this brand, Exam Crackers, and this other brand, Kaplan, which I thought was excellent for preparing. And unlike some people, I did not use a study course. I didn't want to pay for it, and I thought it was a lot. And I thought I could create a better study course for myself. And so I self-studied and made my own schedule, and I used practice exams and practice tests for mine. And so what I did was I got a 520, which is the 98th percentile in the year that I wrote it. And you can see here as a score I got. And then I got a CAR score of 129, which is the 95th percentile. And that's a section that matters the most. And that was good enough to get an interview basically everywhere. It didn't prevent me from getting any interviews at any of the schools that I applied for. And so overall, the MCAT is quite important and you should study hard for it. And there's one section that you should study the most for. You don't need to do a course, but you should have a good plan for going through to make sure you have the highest score, because if you don't do well on this test, then it'll be very, very hard to get in. Okay, and so Casper. Casper is another test that you have to take to get into medical school. It involves 15 stations where you either type or record a response to an ethical scenario. For example, it gives you an example, let's say, example prompt, you are in a university class and your friend told you that they cheated on exam, what do you do? And then you only have 5 minutes to write a response as fast as you can, and then it moves to the next station. And then during that, some people read your responses and then they mark it. And this is a test that a lot of students find very, very stressful because it's such a short amount of time that you have to answer each question, but something that you can practice for to make it easier and much less stressful. And so not every school requires Casper, but I would say that most of them do, and more are requiring it over time. And so if you want to apply for medical school and you're serious about it, you should spend a decent amount of time and effort getting good at the Casper test. Some schools, for example, McMaster, they weigh it just as much as your GPA or MCAT. And so their application formula is 1/3 GPA and 1/3 MCAT and 1/3 Casper. And so you should put as much effort into your Casper as you can, as you do for your other parts of your application. And so it's a pretty serious thing and not something that you should just walk into. And there are ways to study for it. You can find these online, or you can get in touch with Ivy Express to learn more about the ways to prepare. All right, next are the extracurriculars. And so extracurriculars take a wide range of form. These are just the categories that they have on the actual application. And so they're in the categories of research, extracurriculars, employment, volunteering, and awards. I would say that they're all important, but for each one, research is more of, I guess it's self-explanatory. It's working on science, answering questions. It's usually in a lab, and usually it's something that you should try to do in university. Extracurriculars are more of like societies and clubs, for example, like pre-med society or student council or things like that. Employment is anything that you do for a job in exchange for money. And so many students have part-time jobs that they take in a university, which helps your application. Volunteering is when you volunteer your time for different causes. For example, if you volunteer at the food bank or if you volunteer in a hospital, it's very helpful for your application. And finally, awards are different things like scholarships that you've done or medals, or if you play a sport, any like medals you've gone for that sport. And it shows the selection committee that you have a history of excellence, and also looks really good on an application. And so the reason why these schools care so much about extracurriculars is that medical schools don't just want students who are good at studying and can get good grades and good test results, but they also want people who can contribute to the community, that are able to balance school with other time commitments and who are leaders in their communities. And so generally my advice for extracurriculars is for people to pursue their interests and passions, because it's very hard to volunteer for something and to do a good job if it's not something that you're interested in. So you should look at opportunities in your school, different volunteer fairs, look for summer jobs, and any type of extracurricular can help your application. And so most medical schools, actually all medical schools, have a very specific framework that they grade extracurriculars with. And it's called the CanMeds framework. And you can look this up later to see what kind of things that they look for. And so I would say that for extracurriculars, it's something that a lot of people stress about, and they stress about whether or not they're doing the right extracurricular. And I want to say that there's no such thing as the correct extracurricular. What matters is how heavily you're involved with it and how impactful you were. And it's also okay that if you are in a situation where you need to work part-time to pay for school instead of volunteering at the hospital for free, don't worry about it, because those types of things help on your application to medical school as much as anything else. I would say that in your undergrad studies, it's very helpful to get involved in a research opportunity. If you have more questions about them, then we can talk about that later as well. But it is something that's fairly challenging and requires a lot of work, but is really, really helpful in your application. And the last thing is that it's better to be very involved in a leadership role in a few organizations rather than being superficially involved in many organizations. So if you're just a member or like a committee member in a lot of different clubs, it's not very helpful for your application. But if you were able to be something in management or like a co-president or like a VP or something more like an executive, and a leadership role in fewer organizations, and you're able to do that for a longer period of time, that looks much better on your application. And so the extracurriculars that I did, for those who are interested, again, you can do any set of extracurriculars, but this is just what I ended up doing. In high school, I was involved in student council, in Model UN, in my symphonic orchestra, and I played the saxophone and violin. And I continued doing that in grade 12. In my first year of at Western, I was involved in hip hop club, volunteering in the hospital and emergency department, in the food bank, STEM fellowship, and health services research. So I did different specific type of research there. And in second year, I was very heavily involved with the mental health crisis line. I did more research in epidemiology, and I continued to help in the emergency department. And so my takeaways for applicants is that you should try to get involved in your school and your community. You should try to do that early on. Like try to get involved a little bit in your first year of studies in undergrad. Try to find some opportunities to do research because it's very helpful. Don't see what someone else is doing and try to copy the clubs that they're part of and their extracurriculars exactly. Try to follow your own interests and get good at them and have a big impact in them. And be much more successful. Try to take on leadership roles. And the quality of your involvement in different extracurriculars and clubs is probably better than the number of extracurriculars and clubs that you're in. Okay, so we're getting to the towards the end. Now I'm going to talk about interviews. So what happens after you submit your application and you do very well and you get an interview? And so every medical school in Canada has a competitive interview process for admission. And there's two different types. There's panel interviews and multiple mini interviews. And in terms of how many people get interviews, around 10%. If you apply to medical school, each medical school interviews around 10% of the people who submit an application, and then they extend offers to around 5%. And so the interview formats are very interesting and they're pretty specific to medical school. The first is multiple mini interviews, so that they'll have 6 to 10 stations, and each interview will be 8 to 10 minutes, and each one will be given a score, and then you average the scores to get your final number result. And so each interview has a different prompt. For example, an ethical scenario where you say, what would you do in this ethical scenario? A personal scenario, so tell me about a time when you showed leadership. Analytical scenarios, so tell me about the pros and cons of a specific thing. And there's also like role play and communication stations. So they'll ask you to talk to someone and give them instructions on how to draw a specific pattern, but that person is blindfolded. So test your verbal communication skills. For interview preparation, many people think, or many people say, I'm just not very good at interviews, or that person is really good at interviews and I'm really bad. And I honestly can say that that's a myth. It just reflects how much they've prepared for it. And I'm someone who, before I got into medical school, was very bad at public speaking. And I never developed that skill of communicating orally. I never did debate or anything like that. But through a lot of practice in my 3rd year of undergrad, I got much better at interviews, and I ended up doing very well. And so if you apply to medical school, the way that the application cycle works is that you apply very early in the year, and then you get your interview invite many months later, and then that you only have, sometimes you only have like a month or even less than a month to prepare for that interview from when you get told you have an interview. What that basically means is that you need to start preparing for the interviews before you get your interview invite. And you just need to hope that you get the interview invite because it takes many months to properly prepare. And so if you submit your application and you have good grades and a good application, you should expect to get interviews and you should start practicing pretty early on in the year. And it's important to practice very regularly, and it's important to practice with a lot of different people so you can practice delivering questions in different styles. And so what I did when I applied was I started preparing for my interviews very soon after my medical school applications were in. So I submitted in October, and I started my preparation maybe a month after that. And I only got told whether or not I got an interview in around February. So there was around 4 months there where I was preparing and I didn't know whether or not I got an interview. And that's unfortunately something you have to do. I would practice for around 30 to 45 minutes per week with a friend who was also applying. There are a lot of sample practice questions you can find online to practice with. And I developed a good system to practice interviews, and it worked for medical school. And I used the same way of practicing for my residency interviews, which I just did. And I got my first choice program in a competitive specialty. So I can say that the way that I prepared ended up working very well for me. All right, so this is the second last topic, but I'm going now talking about the timeline for the whole application process. And specifically, this is my timeline. So what happened to me from grade 12 to when I got in. And so first, on the left is my grade 12. So in my first semester, I was applying to university programs, thinking about which one to get into. I did my AP courses. I did well in them. I did my extracurriculars and I got into Western. And so I accepted that offer. In the summer after grade 12, I did some research work from high school to kind of hit the ground running. In first year of undergrad, in the first semester, I really prioritized my GPA and I got a 4.0. And I was getting involved in different school organizations like Hip Hop Western and STEM and Food Bank. In second semester, I looked for summer opportunities and I got a volunteer research job at a local hospital. In second year, I did more research and volunteering, but I was taking more impactful roles and leadership roles. I was continuing to maintain a high GPA. I was looking for summer opportunities again, and then preparing for the MCAT. And then in the summer after second year, I studied for and wrote my MCAT. I did some part-time research, and I also did some courses at culinary school for fun. And in my third year, this is my big application year. So I spent the first semester writing my essays, looking at the different prompts, and preparing my application, as well as continuing to keep up a high GPA and also doing my leadership. In second semester, I was doing my interviews and preparing for them. And finally, in the summer, on May 8th, 2018, I still remember that day very well. I got my acceptance to U of T, which was my first choice. And I was very happy and I was able to relax that summer finally. And so just to wrap up, here are my final thoughts about the whole process and the whole application to medical school. And so medical school in Canada is really challenging to get into, and that's not a surprise, and many people know this. It's competitive everywhere, but I think in Canada especially, just there are not that many spots and there are not that many schools, and there are a lot of students. So it's something that if it takes a few tries, then that's totally okay and that's normal. And most people don't get on their first try. And if you decide that ultimately you don't want to pursue medicine as your career and you don't want to be a doctor, that's totally fine. There are a lot of other rewarding paths as well. If you're passionate about it, if you're serious about it, and it's something you really want to do, then you should be prepared to work pretty hard for it over a period of time of a few years at least. And throughout the whole process, there's so many hidden tips and tricks and helpful advice. It's hard to find it online, and you need to ask older students or medical students or residents to get advice. And I haven't even scratched the surface about all the stuff you need to know to apply, and also how to different hacks and how to write a good application. If you do need extra help, then there's many different mentorship and coaching services available, including the one from Ivy Express. And with Ivy Express, I also have, over the last few months, I've been coaching many students from Ivy Express. And if that's something you're interested in, then you can reach out to the team here. Okay, and so that's my final presentation. Thank you for listening and for all of your patience. And if you have any questions at all, I'm happy to answer them now.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. It is, yes, it's awesome presentation again, the same as last time. So, so everyone, can we say thank you to Daniel? Can we say thank you to Daniel? And then we go to the next session, it's a Q&A session. And I think there will be a 10 minutes break for Daniel, just have some water, and then also give some time to the parents, just type in your questions in Q&A, your questions, and then we can continue for that. So Daniel, you can look at the Q&A session and find out the questions, and also you can have a very short, brief break. You can drink some water around 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, yeah, okay. So thank you so much, Daniel. And okay, I will talk a little bit about the next step.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
okay.
be back in 10 minutes then.
Yes, you will back. Okay, thank you. And you can have a look. I can see there are some some questions in the Q&A these parts. Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Great.
Asking.
Thank you. Thank you. OK. 好的，各位直播间的家长们，希望大家能够对我们的 Daniel 说一声感谢。那 Daniel 呢会有一个10分钟的时间给大家呢来进行一下这个答疑啊，他会先看一下我们的问题，那请家长呢可以把您的问题啊放在这个Q&A 的这里边来，然后我们会选取最有代表性的3个问题啊，然后给大伙进行一个统一的这个回答啊。那在Daniel这个准备问题的过程当中呢，我会给大伙花一点点时间呢，简单的介绍一个好消息。第一个好消息就是呢，我们现在给大伙开放呢5个1对1的和Daniel免费咨询的机会，因为呢，其实我们能够把这些主讲人请出来一定是有费用的，但是呢我们现在呢大腾愿意呢给大伙开放5个名额。那这5个名额怎样获取呢？首先是大家可以敲1啊，我就知道呢大家说，哎，这个校长你给我留一个名额。那第二步呢，大家拿起手机来扫一下整个屏幕左边的这个2维码，这是我们的负责人非凡，然后你写呢请给我留一个1对1的名额。那我们接着呢会扫一下屏幕右边的这个2维码，那这个2维码呢会给大家呢是一个腾讯问卷，那当然呢是希望7年级以上的孩子来填，因为太小的孩子也没有意义啊。然后那我们呢，您可以把孩子的成绩啊，刚才Daniel讲的非常的清楚啊，这个 great presentation。然后把您的孩子的成绩啊，包括各个方面啊，然后一些内容按照我们的腾讯预约登记表里边的要求啊，大家填写一下。所以呢，我们会开放5个1对1的名额。啊，我看到啊，有大约10几位朋友已经敲1了，所以呢，但我们只有5个名额，所以需要大家呢，请您呢扫一下右边的腾讯问卷，然后呢填写一下，再扫一下屏幕左边的小助手，然后说呢这个预约啊，医学院预约医学院，这样呢我们会挑选出啊前5位登记的朋友进行一个预约，好吗？好，那下面呢我会简单的，很多朋友呢刚才已经在问我说，校长啊，这个我呢这个特别的就是想知道到底大腾啊这边会就是究竟是做什么。其实呢我在这里呢会花一点时间，今天我们是分2个 session， 一个是过一会儿Daniel会有答疑，Daniel答疑完了以后呢，我会有一个分享，如何培养优秀的孩子，怎样让孩子爱上学习。这个分享呢实际上是非常非常受欢迎啊。那在我分享这个问题之前呢，我会给大伙儿来介绍一下大腾教育到底会为您做什么。那大腾教育呢，它是一个可复制的腾教求学路径啊，帮助学生呢提升4维的这个4项硬技能和6维的软背景。那到底有哪些硬成绩，哪些软背景，这10项全能到底是怎样的呢？在这里给大伙看一下。那大腾教育中心呢，我们有多伦多、温哥华、波士顿、伦敦啊，海外的校区，中国校区有上海、深圳、成都和杭州。那另外一点呢，我们有一个大腾教育基金会啊，跟徐悲鸿艺术基金会和戴泽艺术基金会合作，然后为呢如果没有办法来负担这些腾校学费的孩子们，然后进行一些筹款啊。那我们主要规划路线呢是从3年级就可以了。3年级如果您的孩子想读 GIFT 的天才班，我们有一个辅导。那小升初呢是从5年级开始辅导，就是辅导小 set 啊。然后在不久的将来，可能应该在7月份吧，我会呢跟另外2位评爸一起来讲呢这个多大附中 UTS 啊，因为我女儿是多大附中 UTS， 就小 set 的辅导5年级的时候。那7、8年级呢已经开始进入为腾校备跑，所以刚才我提到了，我希望家长呢能够把名额留给7年级以上的孩子，是因为呢基本上7、8年级家长和孩子就要进入学习状态了。那9、10、11实际上是最重要的啊，这个是呢要完成我们的10项全能。那因为12年级呢其实上半年就已经要完成了这个10月份 early 的录取啊，就已经要 application 递上去，到12月份的时候呢就所有的申请都已经要递完，所以12月份其实已经呢做不了任何事情了，只是把你9、10、11这3年呢你自己做的所有的成绩然后全部填上去。所以呢这是我们整个规划时间线，希望给家长们一些概念。 那我们到底怎样规划呢？这就是重要的一张图啊，很多朋友都会赶快拍下照片来，我也认为这是一个正确的决定啊。那这4维硬技能包括什么呢？就是呢，校内成绩是 GPA 至少呢这个90分以上 ，SAT 的成绩呢，这个我们上一次请那个安童来讲，他的 SAT 成绩是1580分，当然不需要那么高，但是呢，我认为呢，至少呢应该比如说1800分以上啊。那另外呢 ，AP 的成绩，当时我女儿是考了5门都是5分啊。那到底应该考多少门呢？我也知道，像那个我们当时那个有一个大藤博士这个导师是考了11门啊，好像是我们的这个米卡啊，然后呢，另外呢也有呢，像我们的 Heather 是考了2门啊，这个呢要看你读的什么专业，因为 Heather 是进了沃登商学院嘛，所以呢可能 AP 成绩呢不需要考那么多门。另外你的学术竞赛的成绩啊，那这一项呢实际上呢还是非常重要的。因为呢拿学术竞赛呢实际上是非常不容易的，所以当时我们是选择了呢化学竞赛，最后女儿呢是进到化学竞赛是国家队啊，没有最后拿到一个名次，但是最起码可以在这一笔上可以写上一些内容了。6维软背景呢，6维软背景啊，是比较不容易达到的，这个包括下校 summer school 啊。其实女儿呢，当时她写的，刚才丹六也提到了，她写的 essay 啊，就你的大 essay 和你的小 essay， 每一个学校都有自己的单独的 essay， 你还有个 common essay， 她写的其实呢比较多的精力全部都是在 summer school 啊，她的3年 summer school 呢，我认为对她帮助非常的巨大，然后包括第1年9年级是 Smith College， 然后呢10年级他去的 Shadow Valley， 11年级去的 Deep River 啊，然后另外呢，你有哪些 club？ 在这些 club 里边呢，你需要呢是一位呢这个 leader 啊，这个像当时呢，我记得他是 Brain B 啊，什么他都是 executive 啊。另外你有哪些音乐和体育特长？这是为什么呢？在去年开始，我呢同时呢介入到基建这个方面，因为我们呢实际上是有2个基建馆，一个是在呢万锦，一个是在密西沙加。其实我发现呢，基建这个特长呢是比较容易让孩子呢更容易拿到一些呢好大学的录取 offer， 因为它比较容易出成绩，而且它是一个呢可以有团体赛，也可以有个人竞赛啊。那不像说你可能篮球啊、排球啊，大部分都是团体赛嘛，你很难有个人的一个成绩写在上面。所以呢，击剑是一个很好的运动啊。下个周日晚上8点，同一个 Zoom ID， 然后我们会有呢靠击剑特长进入西北大学的这个 Alice 给大伙来分享。另外，你的 volunteer hour 不是说做满40个小时能够大学、高中毕业就可以，你这 volunteer hour 呢，这个越多越好，而且应该对于你将来申请专业是有帮助的。另外，你的 research 成绩到底有哪一些啊？包括你的发明创造类的成就，那这些呢都是非常不容易的最后2项。所以呢，我们为什么请我们的陆遥博士给大伙来讲呢？就是如何呢去写论文，因为论文呢，它能尤其是在国际期刊上能够发表，可以完美的弥补说我作为一个高中生，我就能够发表国际论文，证明这个是真的有帮助的。女儿呢，实际上呢，他得了很多奖项，他都很少跟我来提及啊。但是呢，他那个前年啊，这个圣诞节的时候呢，他就带着这个，就是去年圣诞节，他就带着一本杂志回来，就是著名的，就是 Nature 啊，就是自然杂志。然后这个杂志上面呢，有他在哈佛参研的2篇论文，发表了。然后呢，他就非常非常的开心给我看。然后我相信呢，就是其实对于整个学术界来讲，能够在比如说 Science 啊或者 Nature 上发表文章，是多么重要的一件事情啊！所以这是呢，就是我们给大伙总结出来的藤校录取标准10项全能啊。那实际上呢，我在后面藤妈分享我会讲到啊，像那个为什么传统文化这么重要啊？其中呢，我会讲到这个。曾国藩家书当中有一句话叫结硬宅打呆仗。什么叫结硬宅打呆仗？很多家长到处学，花了大量的时间精力，浪费孩子的时间，浪费我们的钱财。实际上呢，你就按照这10项，缺什么补什么，给孩子一项一项的补起来。然后呢，前面4维硬技能，这就叫结硬宅。你的成绩不好就是不好，说啥都没用。然后呢，打呆仗就根据这10项往前走就行，好吧？ 好，那我们呢给大伙儿举一个案例，就是说呢，如果是一个孩子交到我们的手中，那我们大同教育会为他们做什么？通常我们会跟孩子一起呢find out他的兴趣点所在啊。那我们的3大直通车呢，一般来讲，我们华裔的孩子呢比较喜欢的医学、生物、化学是一类啊，high tech 高科技的啊是一类，然后文商类是一类啊。那我们呢根据这3类呢，我们给大家进行呢这个规划。那我们规划首先呢会让孩子看到，比如说我们来一个孩子说，我想读像我女儿一样，我想去读经济，那我们就会给大伙找出来，经济最好的大学是什么呢？经济最好的大学是芝加哥大学，是最好的大学。然后呢，哈佛大学是最好的大学，对吧？那说，哎，我想将来去读法律，法律最好的大学是什么？是哥伦比亚大学、哈佛大学，对吧？所以呢，就是它每一个大学呢，这是我觉得北美比较科学的一点，不是说这所大学它所有专业都是最好的，而是呢，不同的大学有不同的好专业，这些都需要非常重要的专家来为大家呢进行一些呢这个弥补啊。然后呢，我们选好的大学以后呢，我们定下来我们这8所大学的目标之后，我们包括专业，那我们就开始呢给大家来看经济学毕业可以做哪些工作，会计学可以做哪些工作，金融啊、社会学啊等等。那我们就进入呢这个时间轴的规划啊。那这个时间轴的规划呢，我们这上面全部都有啊。从9年级的9月份 September 开始呢，我们就开始呢每个月我们要做什么，因为呢对于这个孩子来讲，他能够做到呢10项全能是非常非常不容易的。真的是这样，我觉得咱的成年人都做不到。他又要在校内成绩高，他又要 AP 成绩考得好，而且呢，像这个 SAT， 然后基本上呢，像 AP 可能每年啊只有5月份可以考啊，然后那你就要规划好，说哎 SAT 考过了，那我们 finish， 然后那我们呢这个。下一步要去攻 AP， 那 AP 怎么办？一步，这个没有规划，完全没有办法让孩子能够很好的把握时间，这个是非常重要的。然后我们的导师呢，一般来讲都像Daniel这样的，他自己本身啊就是呢医学院的早录的学霸，然后呢或者是呢像我们所有做讲座的那些大腾的啊，这个导师，然后这都是我们的导师，然后当然我们还有时间保姆，然后我们导师会给呢和我们的学生一起，然后找出来，他帮助学生找出来，比如说1月份、2月份、3月份。每个月啊有哪一些比赛，那我们呢要去参加这些比赛。然后另外呢，就是有哪一些 summer school， 然后呢会给大伙根据，比如说我们的孩子说我要去参加呢，将来我希望去沃顿商学院的这个来读书的话，那沃顿商学院的 summer school、Brown 的 summer school， 然后呢哈佛的 summer school， 我们能不能申请到？我们全部都会帮助孩子们把这些申请到啊。那我们非常高兴啊，今年呢我们拿到早录 offer 的。这个学生呢，有哈佛的，然后有这个哈佛的是去年12月份就拿到了，然后另外呢还有康奈尔的是今年的1月份吧，2月份拿到比较晚啊，然后另外呢这个今年的1月份芝加哥大学有一位啊，然后另外呢。还有一位是加州理工，去年12月份啊，他爸爸特别的高兴啊，专门呢12月份我圣诞节正好去欧洲嘛，然后我一回来，他就在办公室里等我啊，然后跟我讲说，哎，这个非常高兴啊，非常感谢，所以这些都是我们的成功案例。所以呢，亲爱的小伙伴们，希望家长们和我们一起努力，为明天的世界培养啊伟大的孩子。那我们再一次啊进入到 Q&A 的 session。I think Daniel can answer some question now. Daniel, are you here?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Oh my God. Okay, yeah, you can pick up some common questions, and the very popular questions around 3 to 5, and give the answer. I see there are so many questions, so I think 3 to 5 questions good enough. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there are definitely quite a few questions, so I'm very happy to answer them. So I'm just going to go through the Q&A in order of who asked the questions. And so the first one, I think asked, do I speak Chinese? No, unfortunately, I don't speak Chinese. So I won't be able to answer in 2 languages. The first one is, do you suggest to do a non-medical or non-life sci program to get a good GPA to apply for medical school? I honestly would not recommend that unless it's in a subject area where you can do very well in. And the reason I say that is because many other programs have a lot of essay-based courses, and essay-based courses are usually pretty hard to get a good mark in. It's a lot easier to get above a 90 in a chemistry course or a biology course or a calculus course than it is to get an English course or a sociology or a philosophy course. So unless it's something that you know you will do very well in, I would not recommend it. And most people in medical school have gone just through like life science or medical or health related programs. How competitive is it for medical school to residency? It depends. And so almost every medical school graduate gets into a residency, but different types of residencies have different levels of competitiveness. For my residency program, emergency medicine, it's around a 50% acceptance rate. For other ones like ophthalmology, which is eye surgery or plastic surgery, it's less than 50%. But for things like family medicine or internal medicine, it's usually almost 100%. So it depends on what kind of specialty, but generally like for family medicine, it's very easy to get into residency. And the third one is if you do a life science health major, what other career paths are available? You can go into, there's a lot of different ones, like dentistry is a very common one. Dentistry, or if you want to become a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist or a researcher, or you want to go into pharmaceuticals, those are common ones. Can you take multiple, Grace asked you, can you take multiple casters? Yeah, you can take multiple casters if you don't do well in the first time. How do you prepare for CARS? I think that's a pretty complicated question to answer here. Generally, yeah, that's like a whole strategy in itself, and that could be another whole presentation. So I don't think I could answer that one here. What are the biology and chemistry book names? Marilyn, if you have more questions about how to prepare for CARS, then you can email Ivy Express and get in contact with me, and then I can help you more directly. But yeah, it's quite a complicated question. Stephen asks, what are the biology and chemistry book names to prepare for the MCAT? So the first one is Exam Crackers, EXAMCRACKERS, Exam Crackers. And the second one is Kaplan, KAPLAN. Exam Crackers and Kaplan were the ones that I used. Tim asked, thank you, Daniel, what kind of research did you do in after high school? I did research at Western University. So I basically just emailed like 40, 50 different professors asking if they have research opportunities for me. And one or two said yes. So I kind of took what I could get. So I did epidemiology research and I did health services research. Yeah, and do high school extracurriculars count towards your application? Yeah, they do. Yun Song asks, are extracurriculars more important than GPA, MCAT, etc.? I would say no, GPA is the most important, and then MCAT, extracurriculars are third most important. And then I'll just ask, I'll answer one more question from the anonymous attendee. Would you say Western's marking scheme is fair, or does it also deflate grades like U of T? I would say Western's marking scheme is pretty fair. It does not deflate grades nearly at the same level as U of T does. Okay, I know there are a lot of other questions I didn't get to, and it would be impossible to answer all these questions, but I will, if you want more answers or you want to talk directly, then you can contact Ivy Express and get in contact with me. And I'd be happy to answer all these questions at a later time. Maria? Do I have time to keep on going? Okay, I think I thought there was something else after, but if not, then I can still keep on answering a few more questions. So I'll just pick up where I left off. Is grade 12 English important on the GPA list for major applications? Your high school grades do not count in the GPA calculation for medical school applications. It only counts your undergraduate studies. This is recorded Bin Wang, and so yes, you'll be able to see it. Is AP courses still important after doing the AMC and AIME achievement? I honestly don't know what those are. I would say if you are doing a higher level of the sciences in high school, then that's good enough. If that's, I know AP and IB are the standard ones for a higher level. And so if you are doing those, then it's probably good enough. If you do want to choose between AP subjects, I would choose biology, chemistry, physics, and calculus. I don't know what that means. How long does it take to prepare for Casper? I would say you can prepare for it pretty well in 1 to 2 months. Next question, any tips to keep my high school and university grades high and consistent? That's a pretty challenging question. It depends on you and your study style and how you're doing. We can, if you get in contact with Ivy Express, we can talk more about that specifically. Again, how my MCAT strategy, it's like a pretty long conversation. So I couldn't answer that here. Jackie, do I have advice for applying to medical school outside of Canada, like in the US and UK? Actually, I don't. I was going to apply to the US schools if I didn't get into Canada, but fortunately that didn't happen. So I'm not sure how to apply to the US. How to compensate for leadership requirements if a student is an introvert and reluctant to be a leader? Again, that's a pretty hard question, but basically it requires you to put yourself out there and to practice a lot. And Grace, is 97% MCAT good enough? It probably is, unless your CARS is very low, but 97% on MCAT is excellent, and you probably don't need to retake it. Okay. Maria, is that
yeah, I think good enough. Wow, there are tons of questions, and thank you so much for Daniel. And I should say Dr. Daniel. Okay, I know how busy you are, and again, thank you so much. And it is a great, awesome presentation, and looking forward that we can working together and helping more students and go to medical school. Okay, thank you, Daniel. And I think that's all the questions. And so all the parents, let's say thank you to Daniel. And I think Daniel's parts finished, and now it's my turn to share some experience as a mom. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you everyone for listening.
Yes, and looking forward to meet with you at the end of May. Ruby will back from Boston.
Yeah, I heard. I'm hoping we can meet up. We good.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and let me know what kind of Chinese food you like.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Let me know seafood. Yeah, I can bring you and treat you very nice Chinese food. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Bye. 好的，各位家长们，那我们非常感谢Daniel给我们做了非常精彩的介绍啊。那在此我们最后的一个机会给大伙开放这5个免费名额，大家可以扫一下屏幕左边，然后呢，包括我们屏幕右边的2维码，好吗？好，那我下面呢进入到我的 session 我大约有一个15分钟的时间，为大伙快速的10分钟吧，然后有一个分享如何培养优秀的孩子，怎样让孩子爱上学习。那屏幕的右下角呢是我的一个2维码大家呢也可以扫一下我的2维码。我其实呢这个分享会非常的简短因为这个每个周日晚上我都特别的忙我们因为我们每个星期有80门课程但是我仍然希望呢给我们的家长带来更多的一些资讯。那我写过2篇文章，一篇是讲呢母亲的职责人格力量的培养，对吧？父亲的职责那就是呢如何呢能够开发智力，并且呢纪律的养成。那大家可以呢加我的2维码，然后呢获得这些文章。那我讲一下女儿女儿的中学是多大附中 UTS， 然后在升大学的时候呢，她是拿到3所藤校的 offer。她本科呢是芝加哥大学，她同时读了4个专业，经济、数学、统计，还有布斯商学院。那她在毕业的时候呢，4门这个4年读4门基本上是接近满分吧，获得了1890年创校的芝加哥大学的3个最高荣誉大奖。他2019年是哈佛大学直读博士前，2021年获得哈佛大学前奖 的博士 offer 啊，他当时是这个，所以呢，那女儿呢，其实她做过什么，我又是怎样培养她的呢？这个女儿在大学2年级的时候呢，我实际上想跟大伙儿分享的是她自己呢特别不一样的一个方面。我为女儿感到骄傲，不是说因为她考上了这个哈佛大学，而是呢，我觉得她真的是一位非常温暖的，而且呢，虽然她在多伦多长大，然后在美国读的大学，包括读博士，但是呢，我很骄傲的是，我把她培养成一个朴实无华的山东姑娘啊。那大学2年级的时候呢，这个其实母亲这个女儿经历过一个非常艰难的时刻，那就是呢，我先生啊，这个他突然去世，所以呢，女儿在大学2年级的时候呢，下定决心，她记住爸爸的教诲，就说呢，一定要生而平等，一定要做呢，这个用所学的知识解决社会问题。所以女儿呢，在大学2年级呢，做了一个重要的决定，她开始研究如何消除经济不平等对人的影响。他放弃了优厚的投行的工作，暑假的时候顶着烈日采访难民啊，寻求庇护者，做出数据分析，帮助社会中的弱者。然后大3的时候呢，他跟着教授做研究，荣获了 Phi Beta 全美历史最悠久的社会学荣誉大奖，在斯坦福大学经济的本科杂志上发表论文。那大4的时候呢，女儿就以优异的成绩啊，这个获得了 Student Marshall 微观经济奖和论文奖。然后他最终呢是获得哈佛大学、麻省理工、耶鲁、普林斯顿、伯克利啊5所大学的全奖博士 offer。那其实呢，去年8月份啊，这个我要提一下，女儿在哈佛参研的2篇论文在《自然》杂志上发表啊，这是我刚才提到了为什么论文这么重要。当时呢，这是女儿唯一的一次来跟我说：“妈妈，有一个好消息，我跟你分享。前面她得过那么多奖项。”都是实际上呢，我在收录这些照片的时候跟他要，我才拿到了这些奖状啊。可见这个杂志对孩子的影响还是很重要。那我呢，实际上想跟大伙分享一下，怎样能够培养呢孩子的内驱力。这个黑夜给了我们黑色的眼睛，我们却用它来寻找光明。永远不放弃，永远前行，是帮助我们每一个成年人，包括我们的下一代，穿越至暗时刻的精神力量和内驱力。那内驱力从哪里来呢？我相信这一点是很多家长，尤其做母亲的特别关心的。那第一，怎样让孩子爱上学习啊？今天只讲这2个话题。第2个是传统文化在家庭教育中的重要性啊。因为呢，很多家长呢一直跟我抱怨说孩子不愿意学习啊。其实呢，我觉得你要从2个方面建立起孩子愿意学习的这种习惯，包括他的这个兴趣点。第一，帮助孩子建立自信。因为我印象最深刻的是呢，女儿从小是比较内向啊，她不是特别愿意的，这个有一点小小的啊，这个我说现在叫社恐啊。但是呢，她在10年级的时候，我帮助她做了一件事情。那我觉得现在女儿是非常棒的 presentation 的能力，而且呢非常自信，在这个方面 public speaking 方面，那就是呢，我建议她去参加 DECA 呢是中学生啊这个演讲比赛，而且呢，我们真的花了大量的时间和精力啊，这个包括我本人，包括我们也请了很多很好的老师啊，来这个帮女儿一起来做这个准备。那最终呢，女儿是获得了在10年级 DECA 的全加拿大第1名，然后呢，后来代表加拿大去美国啊参加 international 比赛，获得的第2名。然后我看到的女儿的这种变化是10年级对她来讲是很重要的一个变化。然后从那个时候开始呢，女儿喜欢做 presentation， 并且呢做的也非常棒。那第2件事情呢，就是兴趣是最好的老师。很多人感觉这是很空的一句话，我来告诉大家，举一个最简单的案例，就是女儿学中文。女儿的中文呢，实际上比很多人没有想到女儿的中文是这样好。虽然呢，她也是这个1岁的时候来到加拿大，相当于在这儿长大的孩子，但是呢，她能读能写能听，而且呢，这个完全流利的沟通，有一点点山东口音啊，这个原因是为什么呢？那就是我们真的是花了大量的时间和精力建立起他学中文的兴趣。我们做到什么程度呢？就是我先生啊，他当年呢是帮助女儿我们把全套的金庸全集，他爸爸全部都注上了汉语拼音，然后呢和女儿一起来一个字一个字的把金庸全集读完。因为女儿呢，她就慢慢的这个孩子喜欢听故事。 他就特别想知道说，哎，小龙你和杨过最后有没有相遇啊？当他呢读完了这个叫做人性最复杂的《天龙八部》啊，然后读完了这个最有这个情节最复杂的这个叫做《笑傲江湖》之后呢，这个我就拿出来大块头的《论语》，我说我们可以来看《论语》。所以呢，这个其实女儿的中文对她有很大的一个帮助，包括她在大学3年级的时候还拿过这个香港啊特别行政署那边的一个这个暑假时期的 offer， 当然后来她没有过去啊。所以呢，这个我希望很多家长呢不要总是说，哎，这个孩子不喜欢学习啊等等，我希望你更多的花时间去 find out 孩子的兴趣到底在哪里，包括我们作为家长我们能做什么啊？我相信很少有家长做到像我们这样，然后能够把中文这样来就是全套金融全集全部注上。当时在我们家的墙上挂了一面巨大的行军路线图，然后我们清晰的和女儿一起来走这条路，爬藤之路，然后我们清晰的知道每个星期我们女儿要完成的目标是什么，怎样一步一步的升级打怪走上去。我相信有很多家长呢可能都没有办法做到这一点，如果您做到这一点，您可以挑一个8，那我也给您点一个赞啊。就是您如果说您知道孩子每周的目标，并且和他一起能够去完成的话，您可以挑一个8。我想知道有多少家长可以做到这一点。如果你没有做到这一点的话，那我希望你可以把孩子啊交给我们。好的，那我来给大伙讲一下传统文化在家庭教育中的重要性。因为呢，这一点是我特别想分享的，因为我看到很多呢在这儿长大的这个孩子，包括呢家长是我们这一代人，然后我们过多的渲染了，然后孩子要自由啊，要被尊重啊，然后他们在这里长大呀，然后其实呢我们讲的或者说呢中国的传统文化可能并不重要啊，但是实际上大伙儿可以看一下啊，我举了几个简单的案例，像《左传》当中他讲到了节俭，然后呢就是俭德之共也啊。那你看女儿身上的这件绿色的大衣，这是她9年级的时候爸爸给她买的，然后去年的圣诞节她回来，已经这件大衣她穿了差不多16年了，她仍然穿着这件大衣回来。然后我说，哎呀，我说这个大衣已经太多年了，这个都不暖和了，我们换一件大衣。然后女儿说，没有关系，说妈妈，我就想穿这件大衣，它非常的好，这个非常的暖和。所以呢，就是我发现，当一个孩子他把他的注意力从物质追求和物质享受上这个移开这个注意力，然后呢，他就会关注到更大的一个世界，然后他就会更多的关注到我们精神层面的追求。所以呢，我跟很多家长讲过，我说呢，这个曾经有一个啊，家里很有钱的样子啊，跟我讲啊，我女儿的鞋都是 Prada 的，然后呢，那个包都是 Gucci 的或者怎么样，然后呢，我也没说啥啊，因为我这个人呢还是比较厚道啊，但是呢，这个我自己跟很多很要好的朋友，我都是跟他们讲。我说呢，大家更重要的其实应该比一比我们的孩子对社会有多大的一些贡献和价值，然后我们的孩子这个谁能够上更好的大学啊？我讲的比较实在。那第二点呢，就是心怀感恩，处处皆善啊，这是荀子的。那其实呢，心怀感恩呢，实际上呢是非常重要的，让孩子能够意识到宇宙的广漠啊，这个我会建议大家一定让我们的孩子多读一些呢历史方面的书籍，在时间的长河当中，他会发现所有的挫折，然后或者说我们一时的得与失真的没有那么重要，然后同时呢看一些更多的有关宇宙的书籍，在巨大的浩瀚的宇宙当中，然后他会知道，其实我们不管我们多么厉害，其实呢我们都是渺小的，他会有一颗感恩的心。这才能够让他呢真的能够做出一些呢其他人做不到的对这个社会的贡献。那另外一点就是我特别推崇的一句话，就是结硬宅打呆仗，曾国藩家书啊。刚才我已经讲了，就是呢在我们孩子爬藤道路上，这2句话非常重要啊。其实我们做生意也是一样的，然后这个做任何事情，职场上也是一样的啊，踏踏实实的结出你的硬宅，然后打你的呆仗啊。脑子太活，有时候呢未必是一件好事。好，那我呢，这是呢，就是有关的这个我自己对孩子教育的。下面我会讲呢，就是作为家长，你是否准备好了啊？这个这是我上一次讲座的时候啊，当时那个他们放在里边啊， 就是很多朋友呢一直不理解，说校长你一直是做了24年的这个职业教育，为什么突然之间开始做这个青少年的？那我也讲一句，周一到周日晚上加东晚8点，我们是共学营，会有职场、地产、投资、创业然后呢 Zoom ID 都是今晚的。那我对于成年人呢，我对于我们的职责，我认为我就是帮助大家多赚钱，因为只有多赚钱，我们才能够干什么呢？给我们孩子最好的教育，只有给了我们孩子最好的教育，我们才能够改变我们的阶层。所以呢，这是为什么我坚持做成年人的职业教育，然后地产培训投资方面，希望帮助我们这一代人多赚钱。但我认为希望在哪里？希望呢在我们的下一代。所以我们每个月最后一个周日晚上8点，我们都会有呢这个重磅的升学讲座，希望大家不要错过然后另外呢，就是如果大伙刚才讲到对基建感兴趣的话呢，就是我们荣耀基建馆呢有一个100块钱的这个预约体验卡，今天可以送给大家。也是同样可以扫屏幕左边的二维码，然后呢可以预约，然后呢拿到这100块钱的这个二维码好，那我下面呢进入到下一个话题下一个话题就是作为家长，您准备好了吗？每个孩子的成功是被设计出来的。在这2点呢，我希望呢就是家长能够看到有一个叫定力和专注，还有能吃苦。就是这是呢家长要具备的培养孩子的心态，叫阳光的心态。就是很多人不理解呢，你看我最近因为我们一直在做基建嘛，就是有像 Alex 下这个周日晚上能来做讲座的那个姑娘，她永远得冠军，她连续3年得加拿大的基建总冠军。然后包括呢刚刚4月初的时候，他呢去参加北美赛区，他又得冠军。我注意了一下，就是这个孩子和其他孩子，那有的孩子得了第2名，有的孩子得了第6名，打得也不错，这击剑打得非常好。但是它的区别在哪呢？就是冠军级别的选手，这也是 good， 就是说很好和 outstanding 的区别。然后永远保持自己最冷静、最专注的状态，把注意力集中在做好一件又一件在训练中做过无数遍的那件事情另外呢，能吃苦本质不是说这个我们当年的能吃苦的概念，而是说呢，为了长时间聚焦做一件事情过程当中所放弃的娱乐生活、无效社交、无意义的消费。所以这是一种自控能力、自制能力所以希望家长们能够把这些带给我们的孩子。那所以呢，亲爱的家长们，我希望呢，大家呢，这个能够培养我们孩子能吃苦，并且呢，善良和坚持的品质，追求自己的未来这个纪录片推荐我们家长看一眼，人生7年，全世界最著名的教育题材纪录片，从60年代跟踪拍摄到21世纪，7个孩子变成63岁的这个7岁的孩子变成63岁的老人，一共拍了14个孩子这14个孩子看完之后呢，就最后一集结束的时候呢，我觉得我的眼角都是湿润的，因为我们获得了2个重要的信息：教育是改变阶层固化的唯一方法。这14个孩子基本上呢，没有一个孩子逃出命运的安排。然后当年在贫民窟的孩子仍然留在贫民窟，然后继续做这个就 waitress 或者 waiter 或者等等。然后呢，这个律师的孩子还是律师，医生的孩子还是医生，只有一个孩子叫 Peter， 然后他改变了他的阶层。然后呢，他呢实际上呢是从贫民窟走到了，我记得好像是牛津大学最后去做一个教授。因为呢，他遇到了人生非常重要的一个好老师，他的中学老师跟他讲说 ，Peter， 你一定要走出这条街。你一定要靠学习走出这条街，所以他发愤图强，这是唯一一个改变阶层固化的孩子。那另外一点就是父母是孩子的起点，我希望呢家长理解这一点以后，最平凡最普通的父母同样能够培养出最懂事最上进最优秀的孩子。那我们家长要做什么才能够做到这一点呢？然后为了藤校梦必备素质，第一，充分挖掘孩子的潜力那我们呢这个对于家长来讲，我们希望给孩子最大的幸福，但是我们一定要知道，我们给孩子最大的幸福就是挖掘出他的潜能，而不是说这个要让他们自己的梦想成真，用什么样的方法，付出怎样的努力所以呢，这是第一点，挖掘孩子潜能。第二点，也是要有目标，帮助孩子确定目标，而且这个目标不是容易达到的一个目标，是需要他走上坡路。就像我们骑自行车，上坡路一定是艰难的。然后呢，上坡路的时候呢，这种目标，所以爬藤不是一个短跑，而是一场马拉松。那另外一点呢，我希望家长呢，把教育永远放在第一位，我们的父母们。 然后您的认知、您的学识、您的时间投入，然后您的金钱投入，然后呢，是否真的把教育放在第一位啊？叫为人父母需要全方位的准备，可以节衣缩食，但是呢，再省不能省教育啊。这句话，希望家长们能够铭刻在我们的心中。我们的孩子属于明天，属于我们做梦也没有办法达到的明天。我们唯一能做的是给他插上腾飞的翅膀，让他在梦想的天空中去翱翔。所以为了孩子，希望我们成为最好的自己啊。那我们另外一点呢，也希望呢，就是我们能够对孩子有一种长期教育。所以，亲爱的小伙伴们，我们大同教育呢，就是如果这个孩子在山脚，我们和您一起努力把他给拉到山腰；如果这个孩子在山腰，我们和您一起努力把他拉到山顶。如果他本来就已经是山顶的孩子，我们希望和您一起努力，让他能够走到真正的无所大腾啊。所以这是呢，这个每一个孩子的优秀的孩子都是培养出来的，都是准备出来的啊。那在这里呢，我也祝福所有的孩子都能够在父母守望的麦田里长得金黄又饱满，结出最甜美的果实啊！给大伙儿看一下我们大同教育的导师风采，给家长们一些鼓励。这是我们的 Nicholas， 然后他是麻省理工，然后去年5月份，然后他毕业的时候，我去参加他的毕业典礼。然后我自己的感受是什么呢？就是我当时站在那里，我说砸锅卖铁都要把孩子送到这里来啊！因为我非常有幸的跟着他进了这个3所大楼，一个是新科技楼麻省理工的，一个是计算机楼，还有一个是经济楼。哎呀，真的是叹为观止，就是他能够接触到的资源，他能够享受到师资，他能够呢这个获得的这个就是同学就是这种感觉是完全不一样的啊。然后另外呢，这是我们的第一，就是我们的讲医政博士的 Connie， 还有我们商学院的沃顿商学院的 Heather， 哥伦比亚的 Jenny， 还有呢 Ruby 所以呢，我希望我每次看到这些孩子，我都觉得抖擞精神这种感觉真的不一样。我们付出多少代价培养我们的孩子都是值得的。然后这是呢，这个 Jenny 她当时这个哥伦比亚法学院毕业的时候同学们全部去给他祝贺。这是茱莉亚就是同时拿到了芝加哥大学医学院以及布斯商学院的这个2个毕业证的茱莉亚。所以，亲爱的家长们，希望有2份永久的遗产留给我们的孩子，一个是根，一个是翅膀。根是面对困境的信念，翅膀是适应困境的能力，这才是跟随他们一生的精神财富那最后一个呢，希望大家能够知道，成功的路只有一条，就是准备、准备再准备好，那最后呢，刚才已经讲了，大家呢可以有5个名额开放给大家这个大家以呢这个左边，然后右边2个都要填完左边，告诉这个我们的非凡说我已经登记了，希望能够跟Daniel预约1对1获得医学院更多的资讯。那我们的右边也是呢腾讯问卷。那亲爱的小伙伴们，预告一下，我们下个星期天晚上8点同一个时间，然后同一个 Zoom ID 816853401181，然后我们将请到我们的陈笑涵 Alex， 连续3年加拿大青年组的击剑总冠军，然后11年级获得美国西北大学的造路 offer。这个孩子的 presentation， 我们在上一次呢，这个栾居杰老师世界冠军过来的时候，我请 Alex 和他一起讲了一下，哇，他的 presentation 真的是太棒了，我极力推荐所有的家长下个周日晚上一定要上线来听一下。那另外一点呢，就是温哥华的朋友，有多少朋友是温哥华的？您可以呢敲一个1，然后那我就知道呢，跟我讲呢说校长，请留一张免费的门票给我有多少温哥华的朋友可以敲一个1，然后呢，这个大家呢想拿我们的免费门票，可以加一下我们吕校长的微信，我们在73118 Westminster Highway 就是呢机场行政酒店，然后5月13号周六的晚上6点钟我的女儿 Ruby 她和轩逸他俩一个哈佛一个麻省，会现场跟大伙做一个更公益的分享所以有多少朋友是温哥华的朋友可以敲一个1Stella 温哥华的朋友，好，希望你能够呢早一点拿到我们前50张票是免费的好，那我们另外呢就是最后一个好消息跟大家这个分享就是呢这个别让平凡的生活耗尽我们所有的向往，愿你我忠于自己，披星戴月培养最好的子女整个屏幕的右下边是我的2维码，然后我刚才讲的比较简单，因为呢 我有更多的几个 Zoom 要进去讲话啊，我们那边那个移民讲座和我们的地产讲座要收单了，我要上去打个招呼，所以没有办法跟家长们分享更多。但是我希望把这2篇文章分享给您，一篇是母亲负责人格力量的培养，一篇是父亲负责智力的开发和纪律的养成。我讲述了呢，在先生去世以后，我和我女儿 Ruby 呢，我们怎样能够呢？就是再一次啊，这个世界上整个团队只有我们2个人的情况下，然后呢 ，Ruby 是怎样带领我重新站起来拥抱这个世界，然后并且达到自己的目标，还是非常非常感人的。大伙儿可以加一下我的2维码回复文章啊。那另外呢，今天晚上呢，因为来了很多新的家长，我希望给大伙儿呢今晚的晚安音乐给大家分享一下呢，就是2020年我和 Ruby 有一场分享，我们讲了3个小时，讲到12点都没有人离开啊，2000多人上线。当时呢，这个2021年的时候呢，这个Mike 呢是在去年8月份，然后我们俩结婚啊。这个他的女儿是多大医学院的牙医啊，然后呢，这个他是我的雇主，然后他也是先生，他太太在几年前去世，后来我们走到一起来，然后2个女儿呢，这个非常懂事啊，为我们这个操办了整个婚礼。然后呢，麦克呢非常感动，所以呢，他在去年Ruby 爸爸去世4周年的时候呢，给我们做了一个我们的音乐学院的 Amanda 老师配乐，然后麦克老师做了一个视频，然后我今天晚上想把那个视频啊，然后分享给大家，可以听一下那首音乐，真的是非常非常动听的一个呢吉他演奏曲，实际上啊。好的，那我想呢，今天晚上我们真的是又做了一个非常非常精彩的分享啊。那我呢在这里呢可以呢给大家最后呢在我们分享之前呢可以给大家预告一下啊，1分钟就是我们呢周一到周日下周的精彩的共学营啊，周一到周日啊，这些是针对成年人的，帮助我们的成年人能够赚更多的钱啊。这个呢我们就是1、3、5我们全部是职场讲座，2、4、6都是地产讲座啊。那大家呀可以加一下我们培训中心的负责人的这些2维码。我们明天晚上8点钟，周一我们给大伙儿来免费讲啊，刘杰院长送我们是6小时的 SQL 送课 ，SQL 和数据库啊，现在成为呢找数据分析工作必须要具备的啊这些技能。那我们就是周一晚上，那我们周二晚上呢是我们的楼花女神来给大伙讲今年如何找到楼市的好地友啊，因为她呢做了10多年啊，就是怎么样能够找到这个又省钱的多快好省的楼花的好地友啊，无论是这种呢这个大 house 啊，还是说呢这种 condo 啊，这个是非常棒的一场讲座。第一如何找，第二呢这个怎么评价是好地友啊。那这个大伙儿，并且它会带来3个真正的好地友给大伙儿剖析一下。那我们在周3晚上就是工资管理员 payroll 呢，这个呢课程特别的火，而且经久不衰了10多年的时间。为什么呢？因为呢它是非常棒的一个求职方向，被华人忽略的，严重忽略的高薪行业，工资管理员每个人都可以学啊。那我们周4晚上同样是2、4、6我们的这个地产讲座，我们请到了冯山老师来讲呢楼花应不应该投，哪些楼花值得关注啊？房市回暖啊，他也是被誉为叫做楼花男神嘛，讲的非常有水平的一位老师。周5晚上我们来给大伙儿来讲呢真实的数据分析的项目，然后这次我们来给大伙儿讲 credit and HR， 因为 credit HR 的项目呢实际上 IT 项目数据分析找工作都需要用到我们的朱子瑜老师啊。那另外呢周6晚上我们是如何成为加拿大持牌电工最快的途径和方法，给大伙儿来讲电工啊，这也是非常这个棒的一个讲座。做电工啊实际上是我们很多华人技术移民一个全新的选择啊，年薪10万以上又很轻松。然后那我们呢周日刚才已经跟大家反复预告了，是我们如何以基建特长提前1年获得西北大学早录 offer， 好吗？亲爱的小伙伴们，这是我们周一到周日的1周7天的安排啊。那如果大伙儿希望获得更多的资讯，可以呢拿起手机扫一下我们的第1个官方微信公众号，第2个是 YouTube， 第3个是小红书账号，第4个是我们的官方视频号。视频号里边您可以找到我有个叫腾妈带您看名校，我讲了哈佛大学， 讲了麻省理工，讲了欧洲的这个帝国理工，讲了这个牛津大学啊，这些全部都是我自己亲自过去为大伙拍了一些视频来讲解。所以呢，您可以在视频号里边啊，这个也可以加我个人的微信里的视频号 Maria 孙 VIC6 都可以看到，好吗？好，感谢大家。那我下面呢，这个这是我们有一个单身俱乐部啊，突然想起来，5月21号线下2点到5点，如果您身边有单身的这个青年人们、年轻人们，可以推荐他们过来参加一下啊。突然看到这一步，好的，那亲爱的家长们，下面我把时间交给我们共学营的负责人 Adam， 给大伙来播放一下刚才我提到的，就是我非常感动，我每次看到这个视频，听到这个音乐啊，是我们音乐学院的老师给我们专门原创的一首音乐，我都感受到作为父母我们是多么的幸福啊！这个献给为孩子们无私奉献的父母，维多利亚及音乐吉他学院老师Amanda的一个作品，好吗？好，谢谢大家。那我们呢，这个在温暖的音乐声当中，希望这个视频可以感动到您。那我们下周周一到周日1周7天晚上8点钟不见不散。下周日不要忘了大同教育联手荣耀基建馆带来精彩的一场分享。好，谢谢。